All right, thank you so much for being with us. All right, we're going to kick things off for today. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Nia Johnson, and I'm the New York State Adaptation Practitioners Network Manager at Rebuild by Design. We are really happy that you were able to join us today. I'm going to kick things off with a little bit of context about Rebuild by Design's connection to the New York State Environmental Bond Act. Back in 2019, Rebuild by Design produced a report called We Cannot Wait Any Longer. And that report examined the need and opportunity for investment in resilient infrastructure in New York State. It documented the ways that extreme weather was impacting New York State and all of the ways that investment in improving our state's resilience could improve the lives of New Yorkers. And as we were working alongside this report, we worked with partners across the state to strategize for what would become the 2022 Environmental Bond Act. And we realized that in addition to a massive investment in climate resilience, we also needed better coordination and collaboration across the state, which led us to found with our partners, the New York State Adaptation Practitioners Network. Today, that network, we convene alongside the New York State Water Resources Institute, Syracuse Environmental Finance Center, and the Institute for Transformational and Ecosystem-Based Climate Adaptation at SUNY Albany. Our network has grown in that time. It now is composed of over 120 members, including academics, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and uniquely state agency members, which allows us to work closely together on ways to improve and scale climate adaptation in New York State. Today, we're working to inform things like the rollout of the 2022 Environmental Bond Act and the statewide adaptation and resilience plan. And in the slide, you can just see some of our many members representing communities across the state. In addition to our nonprofit and community-based organizations, we're really grateful to partner with these state agencies, as well as have membership from FEMA. Our network objectives are to connect and build relationships among nonprofit organizations and local governments to share and develop the practice of climate adaptation across geographies in New York State, break down some of those urban, rural, upstate, and downstate barriers, and identify the kinds of process models and tools that create high-quality vulnerability assessments, effective adaptation projects, and then discuss how we can scale and replicate these successes across the state. I included a few photos here, including a familiar face of us at our recent fall New York State Adaptation Practitioners Network convening, which was held up at SUNY Albany. We had a really great time, learned a lot from each other, and it was a great opportunity to connect. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today. We're really grateful to Suzanna Randall for her collaboration with the Practitioners Network and also for joining us for today's event. Susanna is DEC's first Chief Resiliency Officer and has been in that role since 2023. She's responsible for administering the state's landmark Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act, leading the development and implementation for all major components of this program. Susanna most recently served as the Deputy Director of Project Delivery for the Office of Resilient Homes and Communities, which was formerly known as the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery. Susanna, thank you for joining us. We're really grateful to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Just make sure sound is good.
And I'll let you share screen.
Okay, great. And hopefully I do this right this time again. Let's just, here we go. And we should see a big title slide.
Looks good.
All right, excellent. So once again, thank you for having me. Really, excited to tell a little bit about the Bond Act. I love the overview that you gave and kind of the history of the coalition of folks advocating for a Bond Act here in New York. The importance of that cross section of, labor, environmental, community organizations, really coming together from across the state. I think, as everyone knows, in 2020, the Bond Act was first proposed under the prior administration at $3 billion. And then when Governor Hochul came on, she worked with the legislature and realized, really recognized there's so much need, and increased that to $4.2 billion, which voters overwhelmingly approved in November of 2022 at the polls. And so really, a great milestone, and not just getting it across the finish line, but increasing the funding. So what I'm going to talk through is I'm going to give you guys an overview. Some of you may have read the act. Some of you may be more familiar with the Bond Act itself, and I'll refer to it as the Bond Act for the conversation. But certainly, afterwards, hopefully I'll answer some of your questions as we go through it, and answer other questions as we get through. So let's see that. Nope. All right. Not sure why that didn't work, but so the Bond Act is a historic investment of $4.2 billion across 4 categories. And I put them up here to kind of set the stage a little bit. I'm going to walk through each of the 4 categories because that's the structure of the law itself. And so it's important to understand, a lot of my day-to-day is really taking what we have in law, which is the Environmental Bond Act itself, taking what we have in terms of capabilities that state agencies and public authorities have in terms of delivering programs or funding to communities or nonprofits or other actors. And there are a range of eligible entities that are specified in the Bond Act itself, in the language of the Act. And making sure that at the end of the day, our comptroller's office will be able to issue general obligation bonds for the costs that we incur with the funds that we're pushing out the door. The distinction I want to make here is that there are 4 categories, or I often refer to them as buckets of funding. And then there's one at the bottom, that 5th line, which is an unallocated amount. It's not specifically allocated, but in order to use it, it's got to be pushed through one of the 4 buckets. And there are only 2 buckets that can receive additional funds. And that's the restoration and flood risk reduction and the water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure categories. The language in the Act says that we will spend at least $650 million for the water quality and at least $1.1 billion for restoration and flood risk reduction. Whereas the other 2 categories that I've kind of sandwiched in the middle there have up to language that gives parameters around those programs. Let's see if it works this time. There we go. So before I dive into the categories, I want to give you the guideposts or the cornerstones that we have in the Bond Act itself. And they're really the priorities that guide us as we work across the state family to identify programs and opportunities to move funding out across the state. The first is mitigating and adapting to climate change. There are programs, language in the Act where we're really looking at reduction of greenhouse gases, reduction at the source, but we're also then looking at the reality that we are seeing the change happen already. We are seeing crazy storms that are far more short duration and high intensity than we've experienced historically. And so looking at what we need to do to adapt to the new reality that we have, whether it be drought, whether it be flooding, the new reality on the ground, really. The second cornerstone is protecting natural resources. We recognize that a key part of our resilience across the state are healthy and vibrant ecosystems, biodiverse habitats that perform their functions and perform really give us additional benefits or ecosystem services, as it were. The wetlands that are holding back flow, that are not just great habitat, but are also big sinks of water and carbon. The floodplains, reconnecting those so that we're getting folks out of harm's way. working with nature and nature-based solutions. And that could be a green-gray solution, like with green infrastructure in more urban areas. But that's really an underpinning and a really important value that's embodied in the act itself. I'm going to go to the next slide to talk a little, oops, oh gosh, I just went really fast there, about advancing environmental justice. This is a really important piece. To give you a perspective on this, environmental justice areas are located, or what we call disadvantaged communities, are located across the entire state. These are the frontline communities. We know that climate change is a threat multiplier, and many of these communities are on the front line and have been disproportionately burdened by pollution and the impacts of climate change. And so the Bond Act commits that we are directly investing 35% of the Bond Act dollars in projects that directly benefit disadvantaged communities. That's the baseline. The goal is 40%, and I'm proud to say that at the end of our fiscal year this year, when we put out our report, in commitments of dollars, so that's projects that have been awarded across the state, right now we're running 41%, and I think that's really fantastic for many reasons. We know that there are going to be projects that aren't directly benefiting disadvantaged communities, and so we're trying to strike that balance of hitting that goal. Sometimes we're going to be a little above it, sometimes we're going to be a little below it, but at the end of the day, our obligation is to make sure that we invest across that $4.2 billion at least 35%, again with that goal of 40%, to help communities that historically have not been invested in or have been underinvested in. And the final piece of that cornerstone, those 4 cornerstones or guideposts, are jobs. This is a really important thing to look at. What's the multiplier effect? When we spend $4.2 billion, what does that really mean across our economy? Whether it be the direct jobs, the indirect jobs, or the induced jobs. So there was an independent study that was commissioned to look at that impact. And by their calculations, we would result in $8.71 billion of economic activity, or roughly 84,000 jobs. The other thing that the writers of the Act did was they included significant labor provisions in the Act itself, and you can certainly go to the Act, and I'll give you a link later that get you quick to the Act. Prevailing wages, right? So good paying jobs across the state, apprenticeship agreements for these larger investments. So where we have a state or municipal project where we're infusing a large amount of Bond Act money, or it's a larger project and we have a piece of it, making sure they have apprenticeship agreements in place. And finally, project labor agreements and Buy American provisions, really important to making sure that we're supporting the workforce. So we have these guideposts, or cornerstones, as I call them, and we, within the context of the guideposts we have, the Act we have itself. The first thing that we did is we spent really most of the first year listening across the state, asking folks across communities, across sectors, what they thought was important, what kind of projects or programs were important to them to come out of the Bond Act. We solicited over 1,300 separate online submittals of ideas and projects and programs that folks thought would really be a good use of the Bond Act funding. And then we sat down, there were 4, I'll call them subcommittees, but really multi-agency stakeholder working groups that took both these comments, the Act itself, and then looked at what are the existing programs that we have across the state family? What opportunities could easily be modified and then rolled out to provide funding? What was going to take more time? What were new programs that we needed to develop that we didn't have on hand because they weren't traditional funding categories in any of our grant programs or offerings across the state? And so from those meetings, from that collaboration, then programs emerge. And one of the important things about the Bond Act is that as we get ready to provide a new offering or an opportunity, those teams from the agency or authority that would be administering the program, and I think this is an important piece, right? There's no kind of Bond Act application that you go and submit something to. It's all, we're programming funding through grant programs that exist in different agencies and authorities. So it might be DEC. It might be our partners over at Department of State. It might be NYSERDA. In fact, all of those are administering some Bond Act funded programs. In all to date, we've launched 25 different sets of eligibility guidelines. So 25 different program opportunities. Not all of them have hit the street yet. We're working to get them out. But the idea is that we put out eligibility guidelines. We get public comment on that so we can understand, have we hit the mark? Is there something different that we need to tweak about that offering? Do we have the right eligible entities? Do we have the right types of activities in that concept that has come out of this process? And then the team takes that back to then craft the notice of funding opportunity or the RFA, or, everyone has different names for different opportunities, but really to craft an opportunity to get funding as a result of that engagement with the public, because we want to make sure we're getting it right. We want to make it an iterative process so that, if we're not seeing the types of applications we need to understand, is it an outreach issue? Is it a scope of what we offered in terms of funding issue, to really make improvements as we move forward and also build capacity across the state. Jump into the 4 categories. And before I do that, I want to just note that the funding that we have is for capital projects, and the Bond Act in New York uses a 30-year weighted average. And so that means that across the offering, each time we do a bond sale, the weighted average of the useful life that's included in the investments that we've made has to hit that 30-year mark. And that's something that, thankfully, our partners at the comptroller are the aces on that. But they will look through every invoice, every cost that we really incur to ensure that we can bond for these costs. And so we meet with them early and often. Any program we're thinking about launching, any projects, we sit down to kind of scope out what falls into that bondability category, what would there be questions on, and if there are questions, let's drill down and make sure that we can answer them to the satisfaction of, ultimately, at the end of the day, the bond counsel that's putting these bonds out for sale. So for projects, what we'll do is we pay the costs, and then on the back end, we bond for then the funds to come back into New York State. So it's a little bit of the in the weeds details there, which some folks might have a question on. And we do this for each of the 4 categories. So you've been looking at some pretty pictures for a second while I talked on the first category, and that's the restoration and flood risk reduction category. I think it's key that it's called restoration and flood risk reduction, because it's, again, putting that priority on nature-based and natural systems right out front and center. It's the first of the 4 categories. If you read through the act, I'm going through them in the order that they appear in the legislation itself. So for ease of folks who are going to go back and look at that to dive in later. The legislation puts forth and creates a new, authorizes a new public benefit corporation under our Homes and Community Renewal team to conduct a voluntary private property buyout program. It caps it at $250 million. And our partners at HCR have rolled out their policy guide and are moving forward in conversation with communities and across the state to roll out the Blue Buffers program, which is that buyout program. We've certainly looked at other programs across the state and our neighbors in New Jersey for the successes they've had, and really taken lessons learned, which has been a great help, I think, and benefit to us as the team rolls those out. So that's pretty exciting, I think. The second two, and just for reference across these slides, you'll see again these blobs or kind of squares, I guess. Yeah, they're rounded edge squares on the left. And those are buckets that are specified in the legislation itself. So the next 100 million, there are 2 of them that are specified, are for coastal rehabilitation and shoreline restoration projects. And those could be projects that are specified in an action agenda, a regional plan, that are larger, bigger picture projects that are called out, and inland flooding and local waterfront revitalization projects also. And that ties into the Department of State program. So it's really implementation dollars to add and augment that existing program. So there are a couple of larger coastal rehab projects that have been identified in these programs or agendas that we've invested in. The one that you're seeing pictures on the top right, that's the prior wall along the lake in Buffalo. And the project is the Ralph Wilson Park, which you can see in the bottom there is the rendering of the park. And the next slide is actually a construction project construction progress photo. Geez. And this is a collaboration of multiple funders and multiple partners. It's really astounding. We were able to push Bond Act funds in to help get them across the finish line, to help make that coastal, that naturalized shoreline a reality. And so really that coastal rehab piece. The second one that I'm excited about, I got to go see the construction start of the other day, is in Harlem. And again, another project that's moving forward that needed additional funds to get across the finish line, another regional priority. This is between 125th and 132nd Street. It's a new 7-acre park area, elevating the shoreline to the 2080 projected levels, putting in green infrastructure. So again, Bond Act being a piece of that, helping it move forward and get across the finish line as coastal projects. And then finally, there's this $650 million category. There are a range of programs that we've been working to develop, because flood risk reduction has not been a large area in the grant funding family across the state historically. And so I'm really excited, that we're addressing things like dams, dam removal, dam restoration in this category to reduce flood risk. Culverts, connecting aquatic connectivity is another way of putting it. So we're looking at a culvert not just from a hydraulic perspective, but from also the geomorphic compatibility. So making sure that the debris and the cobble and the bed load and the critters all have that connectivity and with size so that we're sized for future storm events. The next category that we have is open space, land conservation, and recreation. There's $300 million that's set aside for open space, land conservation. So one of the things that's exciting is we've started to acquire some properties. I know there's a great announcement the other day. Governor Hochul, under her leadership with the Attorney General's office, have moved forward with an MOU to help us expedite that process with title insurance. So it's really exciting to see that. And so we're moving ahead with acquisition, but also with a new tool that I know the team is really excited about in the coming weeks, that we'll hear about, which is an acquisition grant program. So for municipalities and nonprofits to be able to acquire land for long-term conservation goals and access to natural areas. There's also farmland protection, which is called out. We haven't rolled that out yet, but we're working closely with our partners at Ag and Markets. The farmland protection and easements, there's an existing program that's called out in the Act that we'll be moving forward with, investing additional funds in. Investing in fish hatcheries is also called out specifically in the Act. And we've moved forward allocating funds and in advancing our capacity across the state with that. And finally, there's a catch-all, which is recreational infrastructure. We've been investing in parks. This is the Lake Sebago State Park. It's a rendering of what it will look like when they make, upgrades and repairs to that facility, which has been closed since Irene and Lee. So we're really excited to see that come back online. It's a really popular destination in the Hudson Valley area, not far from the city. And this is another rendering. This is the Sojourner's Truth State Park, the newest state park in the state park system, which is pretty exciting. In addition to a pool and other restored kind of historic features, lots of, I forget how many miles of trails and access to views and scenic areas. So that's going to be really exciting to see. So putting the Bond Act to work there. And across the North Country and the Mid-Hudson Valley trails, the Adirondack Rail Trail, which just celebrated opening from Saranac to Tupper Lake, which is really exciting. So we're able to use some Bond Act funds to make that happen. And then the Adirondack, the Albany-Hudson Electric Trail to bring that up to be more resilient and durable. The climate change mitigation bucket, I think, is the one that has maybe the most some of the most explicit callouts. We know that we're going to be investing $500 million in electric buses and charging infrastructure. The full amount has been made available, and I think we have a little over $100 million in applications that have come in and been approved. It's an open call. So in other words, it's a first come, first served basis. It's something that I would encourage folks, if you're aware of your community, whether it be the district that runs the buses or a contractor, it's a great opportunity to come in and get financial support to move forward with electrifying the fleets. There's also $400 million for green buildings at state facilities, and it's limited to state-owned facilities. So we've made investments on the right there. That's SUNY Stony Brook, where we'll be investing in solar photovoltaics for the campus to cover some of those rooftops and maybe some of the parking lot areas. Across the SUNY family and the CUNY family, we've invested funds. Details of all the projects are on our website, of course, and I'll show you that. We've also got $200 million that's a set aside, and it's a carve out for projects that reduce air pollution in disadvantaged communities and projects that reduce water pollution in disadvantaged communities. So we're working hard to identify and roll out some opportunities there. So I'll leave it at that. It's coming soon to advance some funding. We also have $100 million that's explicitly called to go through the Climate Smart Communities program. And so those dollars get directly added in, and it's enabling us to go further down the list of projects and fund more projects across the state. And that's one that I think is a really exciting opportunity I should highlight, because there's a wide range of opportunities. And one of the things that we've done is we've expanded some of the categories to include things like feasibility study planning in the climate smart communities. So we're funding that piece with the Environmental Protection Fund dollars, which is a really important source of funding. Governor Hochul in the legislature this year, in the final adopted budget, we have $425 million across the state through the EPF, and that's really a backbone of a lot of grant offerings that we have in the state. So we're using Bond Act to really complement that program, which uses the Environmental Protection Fund, but then use the Protection Fund dollars because they're not subject to the same constraints we are with the Bond Act to do those planning activities, because it is available for that type of work. So that then we build a project pipeline to implement with Bond Act dollars. And so that's one of the areas that I think we've had to kind of figure out a path, since we can't fund admin money, we can't fund planning and design that doesn't have a capital project. We're working collaboratively with the existing state funds to build out their programs or modify their programs to focus on those pieces that we can't fund with the capital dollars. And there's finally $300 million that goes towards a range of things. So I got a picture of some nice little baby trees there. We're enhancing our capacity as a state to provide plant material saplings because we're really focused on achieving the 25 million tree initiative that Governor Hochul has laid out for us. How do we get more trees across the state? We launched last year a community reforestation program with some capital funds, and this year we'll be launching another round of that with Bond Act dollars. So we're really looking to get grants out to communities, particularly as we've seen those grants disappear from the federal government, to step in and make sure we're getting trees out to do multiple things: combat urban heat island, or really mitigate urban heat island, provide air quality, provide beauty to communities, provide stormwater management through trees. The list goes on. Trees might be one of my favorite investments, I might say, because they can do so many things, and they really are impactful in our communities. The last, got ahead of myself. The last category of the four in the Bond Act is the water quality and resilient infrastructure improvements, or water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure category. And this is the second of those that has a at least verbiage. The first funds that went out of the Bond Act were actually that top 200 million. We worked with our partners over at the Environmental Facilities Corporation, and they administer the Water Infrastructure Investment program and the Intermunicipal Grant Program. And so they awarded $200 million in Bond Act money that was coupled with federal money, really to make all of those dollars go further, which I think is fantastic, to make important upgrades for clean water for communities across the state. We also have $250 million that's set aside in the Act, and it calls out that we're going to spend that on municipal stormwater projects. And it premises it, or really gives a priority in the language, that we're prioritizing green infrastructure with those investments. So we worked with the Environmental Facilities Corporation to create a new program And that's the Green Resiliency Grants. If folks were watching the news Monday, they just announced another $61 million, just over $60 million in projects that got awarded through the latest round of that program, which I think is really exciting. Getting transformative projects out across the landscape that really help communities with their obligations. One of them, which was from the prior round, below is a rendering on the bottom, and that's in New York City. In the Bronx, that's Tibbetts Brook, and it's a stream daylighting project that is going to significantly reduce combined sewer overflows in the city, which I think is really important and exciting. And I'm a big fan of stream daylighting. I just think it's transformative, not just from an environmental perspective, from an economic development perspective, from quality of life perspective, really just fantastic stuff. And then the final 200 million bucket, or sub bucket, I guess I could call it, is we, like many of the categories, we get a list of things in the act that Bond Act funds can be used for. Usually, it's listed, $200 million for the following, including but not limited to. And so it's really an idea of how to program those dollars, and that's really again where those multi-agency state working groups or the subcommittees come into play, is to say, okay, what are the needs that we are aware of as a state? What are we hearing from communities? What are we hearing from around the state? What do we already have? Where can we push in Bond Acts where it really is needed to augment things? So, for example, this year, one of the things that we've pushed dollars into is combating harmful algal blooms, right? Trying to mitigate those across the state. In order to really get the word out, because there's not one Bond Act application, there's not one Bond Act program necessarily. We're almost like more of an umbrella over all of these different state efforts. We've created a website where whenever there are up-to-date or current funding, they're posted on that site, and we link directly to the sister agency or authority who's administering those Bond Act funds. In some ways, we're kind of like the banker behind the programs that are doing all the great work in some ways, but really serving as a convening and leadership role across the city family to make sure we're collaborating. We're trying to do things like align applications across those programs to make it more efficient to apply for Bond Act funds or other funds for that matter. And so from here, you can really drill into the priorities I talked about, the projects. There's a project map that you can drill down into fact sheets for all the projects that have been funded. That you can also drill into a funding finder, which I think is really important, because one of the things I try and stress to people when they say, I meant to do this slide, the fact sheets. So you can drill down into what the projects are. And as they get further along, we'll be adding progress photos or other before and after type photos to help people understand, where's the money going? What's it doing? We're all taxpayers. These are our dollars at work across the state. And so we want to understand how it's benefiting New Yorkers. And the other, I got these jumbled out of order, goodness me. This is an example of some of the programs that went out this year, and we'll look to roll out again next year. We are working on a way to help folks better plan for or know what's coming up next year. We're kind of zeroing in on a couple different ideas of whether it's kind of a list of opportunities to come, but previewing that so that folks can sharpen their pencils, start talking to whomever is administering the grant opportunity now, to get ideas of how to really fine-tune their application before the open application process is open, because there are certainly strict procurement requirements once we have active applications on the street with regard to answering individual questions and so forth. We want to make sure everybody's getting the same information and the same shot at getting funds in. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, because the Bond Act is $4.2 billion. And for those of you who are familiar with, infrastructure projects, it's a lot of money and it's not a lot of money, right? And so one of the things that's really key is there are other funding sources, right? So again, that Environmental Protection Fund allocation this year is $425 million. Since 2017, we've directed through Governor Hochul and the legislature $6 billion towards clean water infrastructure. So we want to connect. If there isn't a Bond Act program that fits a project, we really want to help folks connect with where they can find funding to do the projects that benefit their communities. And so, we're happy to talk to folks to try and help troubleshoot that, to try and help steer you in the right direction to be successful in implementing the projects that are a priority for your communities. So one of the last pieces I'll touch on is resources for resilience. This is a little bit of a resources page, but there's a brand new site, resilient.ny.gov, that just got announced in the slides or in the press event Monday with the Green Resiliency Grant, and that is a new tool under the governor's direction to really help direct people and lead people to the information they need on whether it be the current hazards that are facing us or how to plan longer term for resilience, a whole host of resources. And this is kind of like the Bond Act baby version, but the resilient.ny is an even larger version of that. So I guess we're going through this iterative process of looking at what other programs are needed out there to get Bond Act dollars to work, writing up eligibility guidelines again, getting them out there, getting feedback, and then launching grant opportunities. And it's just keep rolling through as we go. So that's what I have in terms of like a bigger picture overview with a little bit of detail splashed in on the Environmental Bond Act and what we're doing. So yeah, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Susanna. That was really helpful and informative. For everyone tuning in, if you have questions for Susanna about this presentation, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions. I'm now going to introduce the Director of Rebuild by Design, Amy Chester, who's going to facilitate our conversation today.
Thank you, Nia T. And thank you, Susanna. Like, really appreciate your presentation and your leadership and your collaboration with us and the entire network. First off, I have to say that I love seeing the map with all of the dots on it. And it makes me feel so happy that the state has been committed to making sure that there's, funding and projects throughout. I think it's like one of the best websites that I've seen a government do. So just really, really want to appreciate that. I saw the great article in the city yesterday talking about the fact that there's about $1 billion that are out the door right now. And I worked in government for 10 years. And I will be the first one to tell you that it's an enormous amount of work to try and push $1 billion out the door. So can you just give us like some behind the scenes of like, what is it like? And how do you wrangle the agencies into it? And, just give us some flavor.
Yeah. It's really hats off to the agencies and authorities because there are so many experts in all of these different programs that really know their audience and are like, hey, we need more money for this. And so it really becomes a matter of collaborating. One of the things that I think has been so strong is these subcommittees. These are folks that got tasked to sit down and take time out of their busy day on a biweekly basis for many months to understand and wrap their heads around where can we advance our objectives. I think the challenging thing has been, this Bond Act is capital only, right? So there's not admin funds, which is unlike other Bond Acts, but it really is about getting money into the ground, into projects. And so that's been part of, wrestling that and wrestling the devil's in the details, right? How do you move money from here to there? Those logistical type things. It's been, I would say I've learned more about like financial systems than I think I might have ever wanted to. But it's learning a new language, not just for me, but for everyone else. So I think having a good sense of humor about it has been the most important part because, at the end of the day, and this is like a philosophy I think I bring to it, which helps, which is like at the end of the day, the goal is to get projects built in communities that benefit people, right? These are largely, we have people who are volunteering time, whether they're paid or not, like they're going over and above for their communities to get things built that help people be more resilient, whether it's buyouts getting people out of harm's way, whether it's hardening something because that's what we've got to do. That's I think that the kind of the the North Star that drives people to collaborate on this. And so I think that's been that's the secret ingredient is people's passion from across the state family.
But and I see it. I mean, we work with so many state agencies, and it's just a really incredible group of people. And I guess I'm curious about kind of two things that are a little bit interrelated. One is that parallel to the giving the bond, parallel to pushing the Bond Act dollars out the door, is also the state's resilience plan. So the state, for the first time, we're now in 2025, and the first time that New York State is going to have a resilience plan. So just trying to understand how you make those decisions if you're in kind of at the same time building the kind of envelope or container for future decisions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that there's two folds, right? We don't have the luxury of waiting to act, right? There are things that we know will help make folks more resilient. Now, whether this one here or that one here has the marginal benefit, as we get down the road and are more refined, our funding decisions will shift, right? We'll say, hey, the dollar spent here is more critical because we've modeled that. We finished our extreme heat modeling, for example, and so therefore we're going to focus here versus there. But in the beginning, we have to start the work, right? And so then that's been the tension, right? There are also existing programs where we know have the same priorities and the same goals that align neatly with the Bond Act. And so what you've seen is the front runners, so to speak, or the early out of the gate programs and projects are things that are the easier things to say, yes, we know this moves the needle. The things that we're not there yet, we're working towards getting them out there. And it's really a parallel effort with that state adaptation and resilience plan that we're collaborating across the state family on, which is, to your point, really exciting to see us moving that forward. There have certainly been sectoral plans that have happened over the years across the state. And so I think the state adaptation resilience plan is really looking across the many different efforts and pulling that under one umbrella. And so it's not the absence of those, it's, we've got to look at those different individual ones as opposed to one overarching one for our guidance at this point.
I'm curious if there's a feedback loop. So you're kind of mobilizing dollars now, or actually for the past couple of years, it's not that you just started right now. And then there's going to be, at least $3 billion more dollars that go out, and hopefully more money. Hopefully the state will put more money into these projects that are so necessary. Hopefully the federal government will put the money back. There's a lot of hoping out there, but being able to kind of control what we can control. How do we learn from these projects and make sure that other communities across the state are also learning?
I think one of the things we've been actually collecting and in our spare time are success stories. And when I say success stories, I mean, so as you noted, I came from the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery and Office of Resilient Homes and Communities. We built projects in response to Irene, Lee, and Sandy. And we designed projects to withstand the next storm to make communities safer. And when Hurricane Ida came through, as devastating as it was also really instructive because we were able to go to communities where they got 10 inches of rain in an inordinately short amount of time, where the project performed as it was intended, where we've seen repeat storms in those areas where the project did what we said it was going to do, what it was designed for, and it worked. And so taking those stories, right? Because I think often in case studies, we say, oh, we came, we designed it, we built it, here it is. But we don't have luxury is not the right word, but the benefit of having gone through an event and having it tested. And so those are the type of lessons we're saying, okay, well, we know when we design in this way, so that then informs our technical team of what kind of projects are we seeking, what kind of projects are we funding, so that we're trying to replicate that, not just in the areas where we've already succeeded, but across the state. So we are trying to catalog those now as, in our spare time.
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of get it. And so I think people on this webinar understand our role in the post-Hurricane Sandy projects that are now being built. And it is incredible to walk the parks in Hoboken or the Big U. It's really incredible. And when we finished the Rebuild by Design competition in 2014 and $950 $30 million were allocated to the projects, the idea that it would take 3 or 4 years, which is what we thought, to build it seemed like eternity. And now that I stand in it and it took 12 years or 11 years, it feels like it was really short comparatively to the size of these infrastructure projects. So also kind of curious about like, how are we saving some money for some of like the big plays versus the small plays? And how do you kind of measure all the different needs if we are going to be building to a 11-inch storm versus a green infrastructure, kind of 2-inch storm?
Right. So I think that there are a couple things in that. Some of these storms are things that we really can't build our way out of, right? We are going to have events where they're going to be catastrophic. And so we're looking at what's within the power of our design and our control. And so there really becomes a question of quality of life. I keep talking about the and, right? If we're investing $1 here, okay, it can't be single purpose funding because we don't have that luxury. It's got to, so I use trees often as an example because it's something that people can really tangibly understand. Like we see them and we have an emotional response to trees. We have a physiological response to trees. We get shade from them. We see studies, business district after business district where you have a tree-lined street, people spend more money and you have more economic benefits from those trees. You have stormwater protection. So we're trying to focus on those ands, right, to start with. In terms of the larger ticket items, I mean, I think there's a whole range when we start to enter into larger ticket items. You mentioned the Big U or living breakwaters or other larger projects. Some of those are certainly in our scope, in our range, and we're looking at. Others are going to come down the pipeline that might be later, right? And you mentioned the kind of the speed or the time frame. I look at the just over $1 billion of projects to announce, and I'm anxious to see projects finished. But I also know that from the moment we announce a project, by and large, most of those projects are going through agencies. So that means they go through the comptroller and the attorney general's office for review. And so by the time they get into a contract and then they actually start, I mean, we're over a year really getting, and to get shovels in the ground. So there's that lag time, which, I'm always like, no, I want to see what are we building? But it's going to be, it's slowly, right? And so we've always talked about kind of a metered approach to getting money on the street. So we're also looking very closely at where are we not seeing applications from? Who hasn't applied for funding? Or who's applied and hasn't been successful and why? And what are the projects that aren't coming to us that we are aware of? Because we're doing things like the Resilient New York Stream program through DEC, where we actually go out and are physically doing HEC-RAS models of stream corridors to understand how we can mitigate flooding and giving communities, and I say communities because these are a watershed-based approach, a study that says, here are the things that you can do to protect your community, to get out of harm's way. If you remove, let's say, these 3 houses and take out these abutments and restore the floodplain here, now these 30 homes are protected. What are the cost benefits of these different actions? So we're doing that. It's not a bond act per se, but we're taking the results of that, and we've created the Resilient Watershed Grants program to implement recommendations like that. So we're trying to connect the dots kind of upstream and downstream, pun intended, across all of these pieces. So, it's like a yes and, I guess, really, at the end of the day.
So on the topic of kind of scanning to make sure that everyone has the ability to access these dollars, how is the state supported communities that have capacity limitations? Some of the smaller towns or even nonprofits?
So one of the things that's part of the Resilient New York, the resilience page, there are a few teams, and we're working on building out larger networks to do just that, to really support and help folks find that support. There are some planning grants that give, and they're more regionally located right now, that give grant writer assistance, for example, through Sea Grant, and some other resources that we found that we're trying to turn people onto as we encounter them and understand okay, what are their needs? And then how do we partner them with someone who helps them get there? That doesn't help for the community that has a volunteer supervisor or mayor who has 5 other jobs and comes in once a week to sign, the paperwork. That is something that, we're really wrestling with, like, how do you get at that? And I think in my experience with the governor's office of storm recovery, we also really saw that. What kind of assistance we could provide through that program or through counties or soil water conservation districts, through other partners that can really provide that assistance on the local level, who really know, or are boots on the ground and really know the local situation and can help.
One of the things that we've struggled with, not only in New York State but everywhere, is this like cross-jurisdictional collaboration. What do we do if it's just really a watershed, or what do we do if it's even a road or a highway? It could be a bike lane, it could be anything, but something that is a piece of infrastructure that goes in and out of different towns, municipalities, counties. How is the state helping those communities connect and be able to work together to leverage these funds?
So there are a couple things that the state's doing. One is our partners at the Department of State have their countywide resilience plans that they've been rolling out across the state. That's at the county level, obviously. They also have, through the action agendas for watersheds, a couple examples I'll give are the Great Lakes Action Agenda and the Hudson River Estuary Program, who are really integrated across the communities within those watersheds and collaborating with, and I think really great models of how we're engaging and getting folks to work together, getting folks to see the context that they live in the same watershed and their actions have ramifications, right? Or they have impacts on others. I mentioned the Resilient New York Stream model because I think the stream studies, one of the things that they're doing is they're engaging all of those partners throughout that, using the river corridor as the engagement piece, but having those hard conversations where you might have communities that don't talk to each other. And so how do you start to engage them? And I think the focus is engaging them on something that's of common benefit, a common good across those partners, or future partners, I'll call them. Maybe they're not partners yet, but future partners.
I'm trying to weave in some of the questions that we're getting in the Q&A with my own questions, because I have so many. And curious how the private sector is, or if the private sector is playing a role more than just building the projects, but are there any private PPPs that you've been able to create and leverage some private sector investments for resilience?
Yeah, so I think that one that it's not as directly through the Bond Act itself in terms of like the authorizing legislation is there's a set of actors that we can direct funds to. But one of the things that I think is exciting is that we've seen, like, so Ralph Wilson Foundation, for example, the Ralph Wilson Park, they have been a partner with the city of Buffalo, and the list is just huge of all the partners that made that project happen. And that's an example where the private foundation world has been collaborating with the nonprofit world and with environmental groups, but also with municipal and county and state, all levels of government. So that that would be an example of it. I think that it's an area that I'm certainly interested in figuring out how we can do more of, whether it's Bond Act or not, because I think we've got to look at all the different opportunities that we have in today's fiscal environment.
Mm-hmm. So we have time for just 2 more questions. One, I don't know that you'll even be able to answer this. It might not be in your kind of bailiwick, but we are getting questions about the pipeline approval. Is there anything that you can give us insight into on that?
There isn't. It's totally not in my bailiwick.
Yeah, I didn't think so, but didn't want to ignore it since it's it's
course,
a top of mind for lots of people at the moment. So we are at 3 minutes left, and part of the reason why we did this conversation is because we're working with lots of other states that we want to replicate the success of this Bond Act, and to do some things the same and some things different. And I'm curious if there are things that you wish were different in the legislation or in the implementation that other states might be able to learn from.
So I think one of the things that any state that's kind of drafting something now, the things that I would look to make sure that you're doing is aligning, there's a great book I read many, many years ago in college called Implementation. And it's all about, like, if you're going to implement something, you bring in the people who got to implement it to write the thing, right? And so the lesson of this really old 1980 something volume that I might have on my coffee table for posterity. Yes, it's geeky like that. Is so as I work with our bond counsel to have the folks who are going to be issuing geo bonds run by like what the ideas are, the tenets behind the act, look at it in the construct of like existing state law, because it'll make it smoother for implementation later, right? We've been navigating that and learning all those things to ground. I'm not saying that they didn't do that when they wrote the act. I'm sure that they did, but they're different people probably, it's been a little while since it was first drafted. But I think that would be something that I would do, because you really want to try and streamline the processes of moving the money. I think that the devil's always in the details and the nuts and bolts of how you go from A to B. But I think that the flexibility that is written into the act that we have, and I jokingly refer to some of the categories as like the Hunger Games, because it's 3 paragraphs of what you could fund, and everyone's like, yes, please. But I think that's actually great, because it allows us to be responsive to the areas of greatest need. And it doesn't lock us in that we're only going to do X or Y. So I would encourage folks as they're looking at bond acts because it forces folks to collaborate and have those hard conversations. It gets those subcommittees to be really active and collectively be creative about how do we provide the best investment of those dollars, so we get those multiple benefits. Because it's not just about this need or this need, it's how do we align those needs across the state family, which I think it's a better outcome as a result of it.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for showing us what you were like in college. And when you were reading the book called Implementation, I was reading Rules for Radicals and
well, I read other things too. It might
organizing
have been in a
protests.
politics
So
and
here we
ethics
go.
class. So,
so just going to turn it right over to Nia for our last moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for being with us and learning a bit more about the Bond Act here in New York State. Susanna, we really appreciate your time. Would you mind putting in the chat? I know there was an email in your slides for questions pertaining to the Bond Act. If you wouldn't mind dropping that in the chat. I know a couple of folks have asked. And I also wanted to take a moment to say, if you heard the description of the New York State Adaptation Practitioners Network and thought, that sounds like me, a part of a community organization, nonprofit, or state agency, and you're interested in joining our network, I will go ahead and put our join us link in the chat, and we look forward to hearing from you and hopefully you joining our network. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. And we will make sure to circulate a recording of today's session as well. All right, take care. Thank you.